Have a seat in the middle. Thomas, grab some water.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for this sensible but also wild run through the illogical logic of the world we live in. You didn't say capitalism, I think, but it was in there somewhere. We can talk about those things and those other things that drive this addiction to acceleration in the discussion to come, both the discussion we're going to have up here, but also very much, I hope, in the discussion we're going to have together. I would like to introduce the panel, such as it is. We usually have two panelists, but our second panelist, Gorm Harste from Political Science, unfortunately turned ill and could not be here today. But Mikkel Thorup, who is our second panelist, and I have agreed that we will do a bipolar kind of dissection of ourselves and become more people than we are and try to represent more positions and disciplines than we actually perhaps are capable of. We'll try. Anyway, I'd very much like to introduce Mikkel Thorup, who is a philosopher from the Department of Philosophy and History of Science, History of Ideas, here at Aarhus University, and the author of, again, an incredible amount of both articles and books about, you could say, the kind of political reality and the kind of political imagination that we live in. And I think he's a really apt discussant for Thomas's talk today. Aside from two intellectual biographies of one of Thomas Hobbes and one of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, two eminent figures in the political thinking that drove us to the point we are here today, because a lot of these accelerated forms of growth are also idea-driven. You know, ideas and machinery hang together in the way we have constructed the world today. The two are kind of inextricable, and I think the relationship between ideas and the machinery that produce things that come out of chimneys are actually, you know, where some of the discussion might go today. Apart from these two intellectual biographies that Mikkel has written, he has also written on, again, a really interesting selection of things that may, I think, be really important today. One is a book on vulnerability and what that is. One is on political violence, related to the overheating that you didn't touch so much today, Thomas, namely the kind of identity politics overheating that we're also seeing, in addition to the environmental overheating that you were talking about primarily today. Also about the perversion of common sense is one of the books by Mikkel, and I think your talk today, Thomas, was very much about the way common sense, that enlightenment project of doing good in the world, has somehow become perverted and turning into its own opposite in really interesting ways. And the fourth, one of the books, again, the fourth theme is on piracy. We'll see if that will fly in this discussion. Mikkel is also the head of two research projects, one on the arguments of economy, the way the economy has become the main argument, very pertinent to this. And the second is a project called Contested Property Claims, about the ways that property now is the dogmatic way of constructing identity. Often we have things, we take that for granted, but who has them and who has the right to have them is where some of the discussion in today's world will also go. I will sit down here, I will take my papers and invite Mikkel perhaps to start the discussion off.
Sure, thank you, Niels, and thank you, Thomas, for a great talk. I don't know exactly what to do because you've taken out all my complaints and dealt with them, but when I have to double in the lack of Gorm, I'll double as both a skeptic and then maybe a bit later as someone who's positive on the future. We'll see where that goes. But let me start by something I've noticed when you talked, and also some of the writings you've been publishing lately. And it's in one of the recent papers you said that we lack a master narrative of the present. But when I hear you talk and when I read your stuff, I wonder if you're not putting up acceleration as that master narrative. And then the second observation or question would then be, doesn't that make you, I was tempted to say complicit, but that's more critical than I mean, but in a sense complicit in or confirming a narrative that's also there for the techno-optimists and the neoliberal deregulators and the people, the management gurus saying it's cutthroat competition out there, you need to be fast or you're dead. There's a constant confirmation that everything is going fast and that we can either have a positive or negative view on that, but that is the reality. And I was just wondering whether we shouldn't question that narrative rather than confirm it.
Yeah. Should I respond?
If you have any, I can go on.
But we can. Yeah, that's excellent. It's a great objection. Yeah, that you somehow become an organic intellectual somehow for the corporations. And I must say, I mean, when I wrote this book called The Tyranny of the Moment, I mean, some years ago, which was about acceleration in the real information, I had very mixed feelings when the private sector invited me to come and give talk, and they offered lots of money to do it. Very mixed feelings for precisely the reasons that you mentioned. Oh, this is fun. We can recognize that. That's our everyday life. That's how the world has become, etc. But I think we really need, and I always try to end my talks, if I do things like that, okay, with some warnings, saying that, look, there are certain things that can only be done slowly, such as living, such as being married, such as growing a tree, raising children. You said, Niels, that maybe we marry more often, but maybe there's less love. Yeah, maybe, and that we in the university should represent the counterculture because we want to do things slowly. We say that in order to take 2 steps forward, first you have to take 1 step back. And you have to be able to walk a number of sort of dead ends, dead alleys, blind alleys, in order to find wisdom or insight or knowledge. So by all means, we should resist it and insist on slowness. And probably in the realm of the economy, we should also think about ways of scaling down. I mean, I don't think at the level of discourse it's a good idea because it's very good and important to have a global conversation. But in the economy, one should probably think about ways of scaling down as well and doing things more slowly, looking after your things, having just one of each. That's.
But still, it comes at the end of the talk. It comes at the end of your talks. Once you've told the CEOs and all that, yes, everything is going faster, yes, it's exponential growth, and then at the end, oh, we should slow down. But it's still a confirmation that everything is going fast. And I wonder 2 things. How true it is. Is it true as a general description of our times? And is it all there is to say? Is that the most important thing there is to say about the present? So it would seem that even though you have another program, it would still resonate with the people responsible for that acceleration you mentioned.
And we should probably look at
and people will find, I am exhausted. Oh yeah, that's why it's because it's going so damn fast.
Yeah, I think the metaphor of the burnout is actually good. Yes, I'll take up your critical objection, and I think it's well taken, and we should take it very seriously. But the metaphor of the burnout, I mean, I say overheating. It's not really about global warming. It's about lots of things. It's about this, when you rub your hands together. They warm up, okay? And if you do it really fast, they burn up. You can't do it this fast, but they would, in theory, because speed is and friction and heat are sort of 3 aspects of the same phenomenon. So the burnout, the idea that I burned for my job, and I worked so hard, and in the end I got burned out. It has become a popular way of saying that bloody hell, I'm really part of this this whirlwind world, and super efficient and so on. No, but we should talk about the super efficient world, but we should also make fun of it at the same time, and realize that as I sometimes say, I can be probably 40 times as productive as Charles Darwin, because he took a full day writing a letter. It took him a day to write a letter by hand, and then he crumpled the paper together and threw it away and started off again. And you always started his letters by asking, you know, I hope things are good with you, my dear friend. Here at the farm in Kent, there has been a drizzle, but it has cleared up now. And I hope in the afternoon that I will be able to take a walk with my beloved wife. You know, and then he goes, and then he moves on to his business. Whereas my typical correspondence is, well, hi, I'm sorry, I can't make it. Or I'll be 10 minutes late, or, you know, that sort of thing. Thomas, you know. But I can be 40 times as productive because I can send 40 emails in the time it took him to write one letter. So we should, as often as possible, make fun of this frenzied world, which is not going anywhere, which is standing still at a terrific speed, you know, stands still at 100 kilometers an hour, but it's not going anywhere. So that's also why I think speed is not a master narrative. It's something you have for want of a master narrative, because it's not going anywhere. It doesn't have a direction. It doesn't produce a vision for a better world, or for a better future, or for a more just world. That's one part of the answer. And the other part, very shortly, very briefly, is that we should look at the distribution of speed. Because quite clearly, in many parts of the world, just as, I mean, if you take energy in our part of the world, the problem is that we're using too much of it. But in many parts of the world, such as most of Africa, the problem is that they don't have enough. I mean, they don't even have energy for a light bulb so that they can do homework in the evening. And the same with speed. I mean, for us, time is a scarce resource. But for other people, scarcity of time is a scarce resource. Yeah.
But would you say, I like this answer too, you know, is acceleration real? The other question one could ask is all acceleration bad? I'm thinking the idea of the university is built on accumulated knowledge, that we build on what has been, you know, done before. Yeah. We grow in awareness and in knowledge. So our own idea, the ability that you have to have insight into the world of accelerated change is actually, you know, premised on a form of acceleration in ideas and in thinking and in, you know, that. So it seems to me that you were talking about particular kinds of acceleration, industrial acceleration, you know, financial acceleration, the way computers now do all the investments and then drive the economy almost as if it was driven by itself. The invisible hand of the economy suddenly realized in computers. And then the third one is, what did I write here? Consumption. Yeah. You know, that we're consuming more, we want more, which, you know, we've known since Marx. He may have been wrong about many things, but he was also the one who said that it is not, wants are not natural. You know, they respond to particular kinds of production and, you know, culture. So our wants, our consumption is actually not nature-driven. It is not because we by necessity want it. We have the opportunity to do something else. So what if acceleration was a problem in consumption, in finance and in industry? Could we not, I mean, still write a lot of emails and texts?
Yeah, I guess we could. And I guess we should probably, thanks for this, I mean, we should probably sort of separate these questions, because although they exhibit a pattern resemblance, which to me is attractive, because you see somehow comparable kinds of processes taking place in very different realms, but they produce very different results. I agree with that. But one may also, I mean, there is also a case to be made for mass production of academic texts, reducing the quality of those academic texts. I mean, as a journalist.
No.
No, maybe not. Okay, maybe not. But so as long as knowledge is cumulative, and as long as, suppose the sort of frenzied economic growth that we're seeing, so long as it's served to satisfy real human needs, which it often does, and which also makes it more difficult to come up with a solution, you cannot be against it. You know, I got my fieldwork now in Australia, in an industrial town, which is marinated in fossil fuels, okay? It's coal and gas. It's not oil, but it's coal and gas. And when you ask some of the information officers, some of those nice women down at the harbour, information officers, you know, don't you worry about climate change. I mean, you've got the Great Barrier Reef just out the fjord, you know, as we say in Norway, and you know that climate change is not good for the Great Barrier Reef, and it's not good for the planet. You export all this coal. And then she says, Professor Eriksen, do you know where this coal goes? It goes to China and India. Do you want to deny the Chinese and the Indians to enjoy some of the same qualities of life that we have here in Australia? Do you want to deny them the right to be part of a consumer society, basically? And to this, of course, there is no simple answer. So that's where sort of the politics of equality, I guess, and development on the one hand, and green politics come into conflict with each other. So, but yeah, I mean, yeah, we should probably keep those questions separate. But as long as it's cumulative, as long as it has a name, I'm all for it. But if the result is that everything becomes fragmented in the realm of information.
But is there a sense in which you took this wonderful story that people in the early 19th century thought that you would go mad if you took a train and it rode too fast. It seems to me that we're, and I'm doing what you said we should not do. I'm saying, hasn't this been done before? But there's bits of our worry about acceleration that may be just a form of moral panic. Oh, these young people today, they are looking at 3 screens. They're not here in actual social relations. They are just everywhere. But, I think you've been studying this as well, and online forms of sociality are as real as offline sociality.
Absolutely.
So maybe there's also a worry about acceleration that fits into an industry of mindfulness. I know in the Open University here, mindfulness courses are overbooked because everybody wants to slow down. So a message about accelerated change as problematic, dangerous, maybe even earth-destroying is a message we can all hear. I think that was your point, Mikkel, also that we're ready for this kind. There's an aesthetics of slowness here that we're all ready for. We can then continue our mindfulness courses and then adopt what Isabel Stenger calls a slow science.
Yes.
Let's all slow down.
Absolutely, and not least, I'd say, I agree with you, Niels, and there is an awareness of the perils, as it were, of accelerated information now that is much more widespread than it was maybe 15, 20 years ago. So I see that, in my son's school, he's now in the last year of school, they got mindfulness courses. So twice a week, he leaves home half an hour early to do mindfulness, and he gets something out of it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
He says that it helps his concentration, it helps him feel alert and awake, and so on, and so it does what it promises. So absolutely. But I should say that, not least perhaps in a country like Denmark, there's an interesting sort of cultural comparison between Denmark and Sweden regarding the connotations of the word modern. In Sweden, modern is good. It's IKEA, it's Volvo, it's highways, it's welfare state stuff. Whereas in Denmark, modern is a bit more tricky because modern is leaving the good old tradition behind. And there are world championships in pipe smoking. I don't know if you were aware of this. It's the opposite, you see, of the World Cup in skiing and that sort of thing. Because in skiing, you should run as fast as you can. Whereas in pipe smoking, you should smoke as slowly as you can. So the person who is able to sort of keep his pipe lit with those 2 grams of tobacco, the longest wins. And it's always a Dane. But by all means. So the reason, one reason perhaps is that I've somehow moved somewhat in my own sort of focus of my interest from information to energy is that with information, the picture is more complex regarding, the way in which we evaluate it. Whereas with energy, it's quite clear that when you extract in the space of just a few generations all of this stored sunlight, which has taken the planet up to 300 million years to produce, that's going to create a lot of damage. And we have colleagues, people like Alf Hornborg, for example, at Lund, who's a very interesting anthropologist and cultural ecologist who writes about the second law of thermodynamic in relationship to our extraction of energy. And surely with fossil fuels, that is going to kick in because the energy is not going away, but it's being transformed into heat. And from heat, it doesn't go back to coal. It stays in the atmosphere. Yeah. So that's different. The material is striking back at us. Yeah.
Do you want to have a go?
Yeah, just on the catastrophic side that maybe Niels was also asking you about, because to put it a bit unfairly, it would seem to me to be a very Western worry, or maybe also you touched upon it a bit that to talk too much about this would be to feel good up here, but condemning the rest of the world to continue with poverty. But it would also seem to me that this fear of acceleration and love of slowness is something you can do when you are very rich and becoming a bit slow yourself. And then that seems as a very positive thing. That's what you do when you're tired. And you think, oh, slowness, that's good. Yeah. And Westerners are maybe a bit tired, so they think, oh, slowness, that's speed. We've done that. It doesn't work. Yeah. Slowness, that's good. But the rest of the world, or a large part of the rest of the world, they would want speed as the way to liberate their societies and the way to liberate their own individual lives. Speed is a precondition for liberation. Being able to move being able to move place and move time and control time. And it would seem to me that maybe also this somewhat catastrophic notion of acceleration is a Western concern, but not maybe a global concern, even though the figures are global.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, yes. I mean, this is a multi-layered question, and we're not going to be able to respond to it here. But as I said during my talk as well, I mean, the point is really to raise some questions, not to come up with definite answers, and to continue the conversation in various fora. Yes, and what we do in the West is also in the North, in the global North, as it were, is that we sell carbon or we buy carbon quotas, right, in the global South, so that we can go on and live as we've always done, and we don't have to do anything at home, and have good conscience because we're paying those other people to do the work. And the odd thing is that what you're trying to pay people to do in Guyana is to do nothing. I mean, they would have chopped down trees and sold the timber and made beautiful furniture out of teak and mahogany, and now we throw lots of money into them to do nothing, or to set up, maybe some schools for native Indians in the rainforest, that sort of thing, which is a very, very odd, I mean, psychological, very strange thing, to be paid to do nothing. So that's one aspect of it. But the other part of the answer is that, well, the answer, I guess, is yes and no. I mean, stress is coming into countries like South Korea and China really quickly as well. The feeling that there's too much, and the material side effects of economic growth in the form of pollution. You probably remember, just aside, I mean, about a year and a half ago, even the Chinese government, they were warning people against going outside in Beijing. Said, if you don't have to, stay inside, because they were looking, at the GDP, right, at the profitability of their industry. So if people start to fall dead, on the street, I mean, it would be a bad thing for the economy. So they told them to stay at home. And when the Chinese Communist Party tells people to stay at home because of the poor air quality, then there is something serious afoot. And we also, since I mentioned waste, those islands of waste which are clogging the great rivers of China, huge problem. And it's come into the world in the last decade or so. It's
but
changing
the cultural
so fast.
evaluation of those material realities may be very different from a very materially secure position where you can afford to worry, and then another place where you can't.
Yes, and this is the reason why we have to start. I mean, there is responsibility. Pippi Longstocking, okay, Pippi Longstrump in Swedish, one of my great heroes, okay, one of my favorite philosophers. And she says somewhere, what marks her off from other children is that she's very strong. She's much stronger than everybody else. She's just a sort of thin, red-haired girl, but she's very strong. And she says that if you're very strong, you also have to be very kind. And one sort of moral message to us in this globally interconnected world, where we are producing climate change and other people have to pay the bill, people in the Philippines and other countries have to pay the bill, is that if you're really well off and you have a comfortable life, that carries with it a special moral responsibility to care for others. So we should start up here. But the final part of the answer is that even in a country like South Korea, I mean, I asked the postdoc on my project, who's a specialist on South Korea, about this. Isn't this just a Western worry? We talk about crisis and about the economic decline. Isn't this really about the Untergang, Arbeitsstand? That Europe is going down and other countries are coming up. And she said that no, I mean, in Korea people are really worried about the euro crisis because they know that it will have effects for their own industry. So because they are aware of the interconnectedness between the Korean industry and the European, but not to the same extent. And I believe that probably East Asia and South Asia might be those parts of the world where the idea of progress is still strong. Still powerful.
Can I test your Pippi Longstocking philosophy?
Absolutely.
Norway is the, what is it here? The 9th largest exporter of oil, and it's the 4th largest exporter of natural gas. The income from natural gas and oil is now accumulating in the government pension fund, the biggest pension fund in the world. I think it's $800 billion at the moment, and said to be $1 trillion. I'm not bagging Norway here, by the way. It's a condition of the global north I'm talking about. Well, because what Norway being the responsible, politically, moral country that it is, a model for Denmark actually, but have said that the investments on this trillion-dollar pension fund will not go into tobacco industries, into weapons industries, and probably no longer into fossil fuel.
Yeah.
Yes. So now you have a paradox of a sort, where of the same kind where we are now paying Ghanaians not to cut down forest. In Norway, trillions of dollars are accumulating from oil that are now being invested in green economies. So you have a strange complicity, I think it would be the right word, between acceleration of the kind that we don't like and deceleration, which is distributed, globally in an uneven way. I think you write about uneven distributions of acceleration. Could you talk about that?
Yes, it's a great subject. I mean, just to start with Norway. Norway is an interesting country when we look at global overheating, precisely for the reasons that you suggest, because we're really caught. I mean, we're in the middle of this double bind of global modernity, of accelerated global modernity. Because on the one hand, you make all this money from oil and gas, and on the other hand, you try to be a good citizen and ecologically responsible. And it was a Norwegian who invented the concept of sustainable development and so on. And we've got so much nature, so we must be good, with the environment. I mean, what nobody says is that those areas are mostly uninhabitable for people, but that's another story. So there is a real dilemma, and the way the Norwegian governments have solved this, especially the social democratic governments, who wanted to have it both ways. They wanted to have a thriving economy, but they also wanted to be ecologically responsible. The government we have now don't really care so much for we have a conservative Progress Party government who don't care so much for the environment. So they don't say anything. But what they did was that they made sure to have a minister of environment and development who really believed in the environment and development, and who traveled to the Amazon, and he shook hands with Indian chiefs and planted trees, and sweated and had a tropical hat, and a tail of 35 journalists who took pictures and did interviews and made sure that this came on primetime TV. So what they were saying was, look at him, look at Erik Solheim, what's the good work that he's doing in the Amazon, and don't look at what we're doing in the North Sea. Right. Lightning conductor activity, diversion from the real sort of, from the real world. But what you're saying about sort of uneven speed, that we sacrifice ourselves through accelerated change in order to fund the deceleration of others.
Right. Right.
It is an odd ideology, and we should really interrogate it, and we should think about it. But another comment to this, Nils, and also I guess a comment to your previous question about shouldn't we allow other people our own somehow? Should we, deny them our own way of life? Well, maybe our own way of life isn't that great when it comes to it. Maybe, yes. I think there are some universals. All people want good health. They want good health. I think so. All other things being equal, you want that. You want security. You don't want to be run by a kleptocracy. You want decency, certain sense of justice. I think that is fairly, although it varies from country to country and society to society, what you mean by justice, but the feeling that things are somehow, that there are rules which are being followed, I think is fairly, I don't know if you, yeah. But apart from this, the content of the good life can vary immensely. And there's an interesting institution called the New Economic Foundation, and they produce an alternative to the UNDP list of human development, where they have a list of countries according to their human development, where they look at just three things. Now, what are these three things? Life expectancy, the proportion of women, I think, in the labor force, and your carbon footprint. And that produces, no, not women, that was the UNDP. I'm trying once more, okay? Final attempt. Life expectancy, well-being, and carbon footprint. Well-being, life expectancy, and carbon footprint. And you get a very different list of countries. And some of the countries which are doing really well on that list are the unlikely ones. Colombia is doing really well. Who would expect that? But the average longevity in Colombia is 77 years, which is not bad, Right. 77 is not bad. When you think about the reputation that Colombia has in the rest of the world. Costa Rica, doing well. Dominica, Caribbean island. Vanuatu in the Pacific is doing well. So in other words, there may be different criteria for the good life. And I think we should be open-minded enough at this stage to admit that maybe the West doesn't have all the solutions.
Great. I think at this point we need your help. I know there are two microphones, and while if you have a question, put up your hand, and Ulrik and Signe will take answers. Yes. This does not mean, by the way, Mikkel, that you don't have to say anything. So just jump in.
All right. What role does religion play in all this?
Yeah, that is a big question, isn't it? Well, I'd say that it's a big and complicated question. You know, when we say religion these days, I think certainly, I mean, in our part of the world, in this sort of northern, somehow secular part of the world, we often think about religion in the form of identity politics, religion as group membership, and as a means of claiming rights, very often. But if we instead think of religion as religiosity, you get very different set of answers. Because then religiosity is about being part of something which is bigger than yourself. And I mean, as Gregory Bateson says, you know, in his article, which is ostensibly about alcoholism, but which is really about other things. It's about epistemology and ecology. And he points out that we individualists, we think that we are the captains of our soul and that we're in command of our own lives. And we should just realize that we're not, and we're part of something which is much larger and more powerful than ourselves. So some kind of religiosity is probably necessary in order to change our mentality towards a more sustainable world. Was that an answer? At least the beginning. Maybe you've got something to say about religion.
No.
Knowing early modern.
Well, I think you pointed to it when you said during your talk you were mentioning some numbers and you said I don't know if they're true, but I believe the people who investigated this, that there is I think it is in this sense of a belief in an authority or in a principle or in something. I think you go to these figures of great acceleration in a belief kind of mode, not in a old-fashioned certain conviction that this is the truth and will always remain the truth, right?
I think one thing which is crucial for human beings, yes, I think so. In addition to, I mean, some things I mentioned, and I think I said it at the end of my talk, is hope. That human beings need hope. And there are two kinds of societies which lack hope: the hopelessly poor and the hopelessly rich. Right? I mean, when did you last hear a politician in our part of the world speak about hope? Right? So there is something missing here. For centuries in this part of the world, to isolate Northern Europe, it was religion that gave hope to the poor. This life is terrible, it's horrible, and I'm probably going to die young of some trivial disease or whatever, killed by bandits or whatever. But in the next life, things will be perfect. I mean, Hans Christian Andersen, Pigen med sovestikkene, what's it called in English? It's a story, it's a fairy tale about hope, right? And for the poor. But it also has some social criticism. But that's, you know, what keeps her going is hope. And then for about 100 years, religious hope was replaced by the hope in progress. Things are getting better. We're getting better housing, better health, better jobs, more leisure activities, you know. But then somehow, I think something has happened in the last 10, 15 years with that hope as well in our part of the world. That we're becoming uneasy, ambivalent, that we don't have a direction anymore, and that this accelerated change, it's just growing, but it's not going anywhere. It doesn't have an objective, it doesn't have a goal.
Unless it's a question, I will fill time. And I think there's some really interesting work being done on hope. A naive idea of hope is that it is something in the future. You hope for something in the future. But some forms of hope, I've been reading this ethnography of Fiji, where Fijians have been for centuries and decades been denied land rights that they think they have ancestral claims to. And the ethnographer who was there says that their hope is not a future, it is the reclamation of something in the past that they think they have lost. And so they're repeating in hopeful expectation of reclaiming something in the past, you know, something that, you know, will happen. So it's not a future, or you said the problem of modernity is that it's a future-oriented, progress-oriented form of ideology. Hope does not necessarily have to be, is what I'm saying, you know, a future-oriented kind. It can be that kind of, can I call it nostalgic? Because this is where I'm going, that there's a sense in your talk that there's a little bit of nostalgia. Could we go back to the farming days when things went a little slower? The horse carriage days?
Yeah, but I'm perfectly comfortable with that, Nils. But as you know, one thing we should keep in mind when we talk about change, and you touched upon it, and I didn't really do that during my talk, because I spoke too fast, is that different parts, you might say, of a culture change at different speeds. You know, I mean, it's not as if everything changes at the same pace. And when you want some things to change, you also want some things not to change. And there may be some changes that you're favorable to, whereas other changes you think are wrong. So we need to sort this out. What do we need to recover from a recent or distant past that we've lost? You mentioned love. Maybe there's less love. I don't know. Maybe. It's hard to quantify. Maybe there's less of certain forms of slowness that we really appreciated in the past, such as the pleasure of mending your own boots. I don't know. The pleasure of being in command of some practical things that we've lost because we're so alienated. I mean, if my phone goes bust, I mean, I have no idea what to do with it. Whereas in other ways, when it comes to health, gender equality, a few other things, you and I would probably not be willing to relinquish those. So we have to sort out the different nostalgic bit. And another interesting thing here is, when was the past? When is the future? Was the past, I mean, was it last year? Was it the 1950s? I think for some of our politicians, the past was some idealized notion of the 1950s and 60s. For certain politicians. I'm not giving names.
We're calling them modern cock romanticism here. There's a question right back.
Niels, could I just...
many questions now.
Yeah.
So.
Oh,
absolutely.
I'll let you.
there's a question, then you...
Yeah, all right.
Hi, Thomas. Thank you for your fast talk. I'm an anthropologist, as you are, as you know. My question, I'm understandable because I hear a lot of echo. Okay.
It's fine.
Okay. It's about knowledge and how this characterization of the modern time, as you put it, of acceleration all the time, of faster change. What does that mean for our way of knowing? Do we have to develop that also? Has that to be different, qualitatively faster, perhaps? Mm-hmm. Our method, or the method the anthropologists have become famous for, is notoriously slow. We do field work. We're always behind. We describe things after they have been acted out. So we're looking always in a way backwards. That's a criticism we get when we work together with development workers or designers or things. When you talk about the methodology of hope, you're taking this future in, and I think there was a very interesting discussion right now about what that means for also knowing the past. But my question to you is, what can we contribute? Do anthropologists have a special way of tackling the increasing change of modernity? Is fieldwork still an option? Can we do something with it? Can we contribute? Can we slow down time if that is what you want to?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that is what I want to in some respects, because as I said, I mean, certain things can only be done slowly, such as reading Dostoevsky or doing fieldwork, which are similar kinds of endeavor, because they're about understanding the complexity both of the human life world and the complexity of what produces us, which is history, and to try to do both at the same time. Yes, well, obviously we do get our information in new ways now, for better and worse. I mean, there are good and bad sides to this, as Niels also pointed out. So instead of sort of trying to drink the entire ocean of information, we have to learn how to swim in it. And you have to get a sort of a good machete, okay, to cut your way through the jungle of information, instead of trying to chart and describe every tree you encounter. You have to find your own paths through the jungle and your own techniques for swimming in the ocean of information, to use very sort of simple metaphors. So that's fine. You know, we just have to acquire the skills. And probably people who are younger than us, they're clearly better at it than we are. Patching it together, creating their own narratives, finding their own paths, and not worrying so much as we do about all the articles that we haven't read, and all the monographs that we only seen the cover of, you know, and all the books we've got sitting on our shelves that we'll never find the time to read ever. You know, they may worry less about this than you and I. But Tom, I think fieldwork is crucial, and I think that we at the university, and not least a subject like anthropology, but also intellectual history and philosophy, represent a counterculture in that we try to slow down, we try to put on the brakes, say that certain things can only be done slowly, such as getting to know people. We don't just do interviews, we hang around, we sit around and wait. I mean, anthropological fieldwork is not very capital intensive. It's not expensive. It's very cheap research compared to laboratory research with all that equipment and assistance and stuff. It's very cheap. You just have to keep someone alive somewhere for a certain period of time. And it's not even very labor intensive in the sense that much of the time, at least that's my experience of fieldwork, you sit around waiting for people who never show up. Or if you do village fieldwork, I mean, one day is like the preceding one, but you really have to experience many of those days to be sure of what you've seen or what you think you've seen. And then you get these multi-layered observations that give you what Clifford Geertz famously spoke of as thick descriptions. And that can only be done slowly, just like reading a good novel. So yes, there is a place for us. And yes, we probably need to market our speciality better in order to show the world that certain things can only be done slowly. So yeah, I think anthropology, we can be a powerful counterculture, and people like us can be a powerful counterculture in showing one thing that everybody really knows, that there are certain things that need to be slow. And to return to sort of what was my main focus today, I mean, one of the things that has to be done slowly is saving the planet and saving the future of humanity.
We need philosophers too, right, Mikkel?
Well, we get money to do nothing, and I think that's the whole part, the point of the humanities. That's paying people who are troublesome to stay inactive for very long. But I just wanted to there was something that sort of caught my something in this accelerationist literature that kind of worries me, and that came up now when you are about the question about religion, where you said the pleasure of mending one's shoes. And I wonder if anyone has ever really loved doing that, or whether that is the wife
Possibly
doing
not.
all the labor-intensive, hard work, or the slaves, or the all kinds of people who did that work, that we now, I would love to know a craft. If only I could mend my own things. Who on earth wanted to do that?
Yeah.
When they could give it to someone else, that was the greatest liberation of mankind. That allowed for all kinds of other activities. And I just wondered also when what you said about secularism, I'm a bit worried today, and I think the 10, 15 years time scale you said is quite right, where that has become a value that is more easily questioned than in the last 200 years or 150 years. Modernity, acceleration, growth, prosperity, and I wonder if, and I can see the point in criticizing that, but I'm also kind of skeptical of the things that we are throwing out, which is the global middle class. It's people living longer, living healthier, more beautiful lives, more time for love, is that what you want? More time for work, if that's what you want. All kinds of things that are made possible that in thousands of years, where religion was the main frame of reference for people, they were told to shut up and sit still and wait for the next life. And I think when you were told people, or when you began to tell yourself, don't shut up, be very unhappy where you are, and you want to go over there, you want that future, that was a great liberation. And something came of that was ambivalent,
Yes.
but it's the price to pay for liberation.
Yes, I don't disagree with this, but yes, I mean religion as hierarchical, organized religion.
Which is the way that most people have known it for
That's right.
thousands of years.
That's
Religiosity, that's a new thing.
Yes, at least in our part of
Organized
the world. Oh
religion.
yeah, absolutely. For monotheists. But let me put it differently. Maybe what we need is not to leave ideas of progress and development behind, but to create a credible narrative of progress that is sustainable, equitable, and which deals with the polarizations of identity that we're seeing in the world today. And that's why I mean that somehow it seems to me that modernity lost its nerve at some point. I mean, lost its confidence in its ability to solve these problems. Maybe it started already with the Vietnam War. But I think
wasn't your talk also a loss of hope in modernity?
Yeah, I think yes, exactly. So we should, and we've got some really sort of hairy challenges ahead. So it's just a matter of getting getting down to starting to tackle them. But then we need that credible story about where we're going. Where do we want to be in 100 years? And I must admit that, I live in such short time spans that I wrote this book about the happiness and the good life, okay? And I gave a talk about that. And then someone came up to me afterwards and said, well, so, Thomas, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I said, bloody hell, I don't even know what I'm going to do tomorrow. And that's a bit, it's thought-provoking, isn't it? The narrative, the biographical narrative is also becoming fragmented in the same way.
I think there are 2 questions in the back, is that right? Ulrich?
You talked about all the solution you could, in the future, how would you stop this acceleration, or at least make it not so it's a damnation for humans. But maybe that I sit here and I think maybe that's a pessimistic way of looking at it, but will it actually change? Because I feel like humans are a very selfish race, and the capitalism and people will always want profit from themselves. So do you actually think that we will change in time so we can save the human race or something like that?
It's a good question, of course. And it is really, you sort of hit at the very sort of heart of what we're talking about in a certain way. Because what many of us are grappling with, many intellectuals around the world are now grappling with, are those credible narratives. Trying to find those credible narratives that point forward, that reconcile the contradictions that we're living in, and that somehow bring us out of this corner into which we painted ourselves. Whether or not human beings are selfish or not, it really depends on how you look. I think human beings are intensely social, and that what keeps us going is not so much the satisfaction of our own needs, but it's the recognition from others. That you want to be useful, you want to do something that other people think is okay. It doesn't have to be 100,000 people. Maybe it's just 2 who come up with you and say, they give you a pat on the back and say that, keep on the good work. If someone does that to me, it makes my day. It's enough. It keeps me going. So we can be quite simple in that sense. And recognition, I think, is at least just as important as this somehow sort of selfish urge that people are talking about. And maybe you would.
No, I'll come back.
Okay, the second part of the answer. The second part of the answer is that it's a slightly longer answer, but I'll try to condense it. There is this very important economist called Elinor Ostrom, who died a few years ago. She was the first woman who won the Nobel Prize in economics, and she challenged a theory of the tragedy of the commons, which had been developed in the 1960s. And the tragedy of the commons is very simple. Garrett Hardin. And it was good, it was a good, important theory about how to manage a common resource when there is no sort of state or any centralized power which regulates the exploitation of that resource. It means that every fisherman goes out and they fish as much fish as they can. And some of them get better technology, they get outdoor motors, they get better nets, then everybody else has to get outdoor motors and better nets. So after a few years, there's no fish left. Right? After a few years, there's no fish left. That's the tragedy of the commons. What Elinor Ostrom has shown in a critical appraisal and empirical research on his findings, he's also collaborated with anthropologists, is that people in local communities can be rather good at managing commons in a sustainable way. And one of the best examples is that of irrigation systems in Southeast Asia. Because everybody loses. If you get free riders, if you get people who sabotage it, people who don't do their part of it, everybody loses. So everybody becomes very committed to the common cause. And one possibility that has been raised by people who have been thinking about the problems of ecological sustainability is to try to elevate the logic of the irrigation system to a higher level, to a high level of scale. And I leave it at that because I'm not sure if it's possible.
But I think this question raises an important issue, namely that of capitalism. I said I would try to get into it, but there are 2 possibilities here. Either you're right and humans are by nature selfish, or the anthropologists are right, namely that humans are plastic social beings that adapt to whatever mode of society in which they live. And some forms of society, some forms of production drive certain kinds of selfishness. It's not to say that there are societies out there where no one is selfish, but certain forms of selfishness, perhaps those that are about accumulating stuff, are driven by a particular form of production and consumption system that sometimes is called capitalism.
Yeah.
You know, is it? I'm wondering, is it modernity that is the big culprit here, or is it the transformation of modernity, the marriage of certain forms of production with certain forms of ideas about acceleration that somehow drive a particular kind of selfishness for more stuff, more things, more experiences?
Yeah.
Or is it a human drive? Because if it's a human drive, we're lost. You know, there's no hope.
I think, you know, competitive. I wrote a book about this some years ago with a biologist friend of mine. It was quite fun, about competition, about the paradoxes of competition, and what we call the treadmill syndrome, which is also known in evolutionary theory as a Red Queen phenomenon from a story from Alice in Wonderland. And the treadmill syndrome is just what you're saying. I mean, if he's got one, I need one. If he's got a bigger one, I want a bigger one too. You know, keeping up with each other through this form of destructive competition, which is not really going anywhere. And at the end of the day, you're neither more happy nor less happy than you were when you started. Maybe slightly less happy, because you've got all this stuff. You've got all this stuff that you need to look after that you didn't really want. So there is, yes. Well, capitalism, yes. I mean, certain kind of individualism. I mean, Bateson spoke about there being something wrong with the sort of epistemology of Western man. Okay, so something fairly deep. I mean, if you take socialist societies, what we know about socialist societies is that, I mean, up to the present, they haven't fared much better when it comes to the environment. They've been better regarding distribution and equality, but not regarding the environment. But can we think of modernity without competitive capitalism? You know, Nils, I think one of the most harmful thing that happened was the deregulation of the world economy. I mean, the fact that, you know, global free trade, the WTO world, because, you know, you get this logic of comparative advantage. Everything is scaled up. It becomes impossible to have a small small-scale economy anywhere, because you're being outcompeted by the huge factories and plantations. And in the end, if everything that matters is competitive advantage, in the end, it's not really going to be profitable to produce anything anywhere else but China. And that is, you know, it's not good news for the small banana farmers in Dominica when they, for example, they lost their quotas and the guaranteed minimum prices from the European Union and Britain due to deregulation, and as a result, it's impossible for them to compete with the huge plantations in Costa Rica. So that's, I mean, as a part of the, you see what I'm getting at? Yes. Yeah. So I think that's the
But there's also something in human nature that maybe be a sort of a counter to the acceleration, namely that there's just a limit to how fast we can go. And once we are asked to move faster, then we find a way to avoid supervision or slow down intentionally or speak slower or mind dream or something. So human nature, in a sense, is a brake on acceleration's worst effects. There's something in us that even though our phones and stuff around us can do all kinds of things, we still use them for fairly banal, idiotic things.
Yeah,
and
that's right,
it doesn't really speed up that. We don't use the speed that's available to us because we don't want to.
Yeah.
Even though it's available, we don't use it.
Yeah, but you know, I'm a bit more worried than you are actually. So I feel that what we're seeing in a number of interrelated domains is what, again, in evolutionary theory is called runaway processes. That you have some kind of adaptation which was functional, but then it just continued until it became dysfunctional. And since I've mentioned Bateson several times, one story that he tells, which is also being told by Tone Sanders, who's a rather well-known Danish journalist and writer of science books, is that of the Irish elk. And I'll make it very brief, because we're running out of time soon. The Irish elk, which had very large antlers, and it was good for him, because for those Irish elks who had big antlers, because they got lots of women, you know, it attracted women, and they could scare off all the others. So the evolution sort of, it favored large antlers, and they grew and grew and grew. But then the climate changed, one thing. The climate became warmer in Europe, so you got forests. It's hard to maneuver in a forest with very large antlers, because they get stuck. Seriously. Large antlers are very expensive, I mean, in terms of nutrition, because you need to eat all the time. So many of these big male stags, they were probably continuously malnourished in spite of eating all the time, because most of the energy went to feed the antlers. And thirdly, that's my theory, I believe that many of them, they suffered chronic headaches. I mean, can you imagine carrying that weight? And they went extinct. So the point is that big antlers, it was functional in a given historical period with a particular climate, and up to a certain point, when they grew even larger and the climate changed, they became dysfunctional. So we need to be flexible. That's the point. And I wonder if our civilization is not an Irish elk.
Yeah. All the stuff, yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for a very fascinating talk. I just have two sort of comments/questions to the way you talk about the relation between change and modernity. The first thing is that about change before modernity. I think that or you sort of give the impression that before 1800 or the Industrial Revolution, change was very moderate and well, things changed but not very fast. I'm just wondering whether it wouldn't be possible to argue that there was actually often quite dramatic and catastrophic change in the pre-modern world, like Europe losing a third of its population within half a century, the late 13th century, and things like that. So maybe change, catastrophic change, maybe even accelerated change, is actually not tied only to modernity. The other thing is that I think we have heard about, or you've talked about, change in modernity in two ways today. One is that it definitely had a direction, and one is that it doesn't have a direction. And I guess that the way that especially sociologists in the 1990s talked about that, this was to distinguish between a classic modernity where you have a lot of change, but it was in a specific direction, and then you talk about a second modernity or a reflexive modernity, which is the direction-less change. I just want to know whether you buy into that way of thinking.
Thank you. Big question. Yes, yes, absolutely. And we shouldn't think that pre-modern societies were in any way unchanging. I mean, there were sort of dramatic upheavals, and empires rose and fell, and so on. And I mean, if you think about, the period of the Roman Empire, which actually lasted for several hundred years and was quite successful, and people who lived right at the end of the Roman Empire had no idea that they were witnessing the end of the Roman Empire. Why should they? It had been there forever. So that could also sort of be a reminder to ourselves that we may also be living at the end of something, and maybe not. Maybe it will chug on for another couple of hundred years, and then our great grandchildren will have to pay the price. This we don't know for sure. I mean, we have to be honest about that. But maybe we can think about periods of change as sort of punctuated equilibrium, as they do in the evolutionary theory again sometimes. That you have long periods of stability, and then all of a sudden you get lots of change. And then you have stability again for a long time, and then lots of change, because in European history we see this with the with the rise of the ancient civilization, for example, of classical civilization. Things started to happen pretty fast. I mean, from Homer to Plato to Aristotle, and then on to the Romans. Things happened pretty fast, and I'm sure that people who lived around the Mediterranean at the time of the expansion of the Roman Empire felt that things are happening really fast. Things are changing. And the same with the Muslim expansion, which covered, most of North Africa in the space of just one generation. Conquered most of North Africa. So by all means, we should be aware of that and not to think that we are changing fast. Regarding reflexive modernity, I think people who speak about second or reflexive modernity, like Giddens, Beck, Bauman, that they're onto something important. That increasingly the self is becoming a project, and you look yourself in the mirror. And that's where, the identity problem comes in, which I haven't really spoken much about. You look yourself in the mirror and you ask yourself, who the hell am I seeing? Which I believe, I buy into this to the extent that I believe that people in the past didn't do that to the same extent because they had other things to do, such as making a living, such as fixing other people's boots. Yeah.
And it's better to doubt yourself than having someone tell you, do those boots.
Yes.
Much better.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
But the change in identity in the individualism is just one change from modernity to reflexive modernity. I think you touch upon this, that if modernity was the project of producing goods, more goods, things, then the project of the reflexive modernity has become inadvertently the production of bads. Bad environment, bad terrorists, bad, finance. Yeah. And that exactly these three, the types of people we don't like, the types of, environment we don't want, and the type of economy that is driving us all down the sink is actually those are exactly the three types of world risks that Ulrich Beck also talks about. The same kinds that you're talking about through overheating, you could say, right?
Yes, I think, yes, absolutely. It is. And that's also why there's a real need to find ways of being optimistic, not only on behalf of yourself. I mean, there are surveys among young people in Northern Europe which indicate that young people are extremely pessimistic regarding the future of the world and even the future of their society. But they can be quite optimistic when it comes to their own lives. I'll be okay, but everybody else will go down the drain. And which is not something that you want to build a society society on. And it has also been pointed out, after the transition to neoliberalism, when this came with a vengeance in the 1980s, you got this category of young aspiring professionals known as the yuppies. And it was objected to them even by old conservatives, who could be ship owners, owners of industry, you know, factory owners and so on, that these people are only thinking about their own careers, whereas we built society. You know, we produced infrastructure, we produced jobs, we cared for our workers, etc. While these people are only concerned with their own careers. I mean, this is anecdotal evidence, and it's not really substantial, but I would go quite far to defend the view that modernity has lost its nerve, it's lost its confidence, it's lost its direction, it's in a sense it's lost its sense of progress, and that this has something to do with the environment and the environmental crisis. It's not the whole story, but it's part of it, and that we need a new story of progress and development for the 21st century, which we're not quite there yet. Yeah.
You've been waiting a long time. I'm sorry.
Thank you, and thank you for a very inspiring lecture. My question is that I'm still skeptical as to the absurdity of growth, of continuous growth. That you mentioned the example of measuring wealth in cubic meters, and we have if we look at the computers we had in 2000 and the iPad we have today, I think we're better off with the way smaller iPad that we have today. And also the introduction of the shared economy, which is very highly praised by the environmentalists, but studies have shown that it's actually arising from economic incentives rather than environmental incentives. So my question is whether is growth really that, continuous growth, really that absurd?
Well, I'm not an economist, but you know, it seems to make sense that you can have growth if you just have growth in the right domains. Right? I mean, and that has been an argument, in fact, which has been used also by some economists against this idea that growth is absurd. You can have growth in the realm of the production of services, for example, which is not necessarily environmentally dangerous, or in health services even. You can have real growth in sort of healing people's diseases, which shows on GDP, looks good, and it doesn't deplete the world of resources. What is being objected to this is that de facto we haven't seen an example of sort of a virtualization of the economy along these lines. In other words, growth has so far been closely connected to the depletion of natural resources and the extraction of fossil fuels and energy. But there's no reason why it should always be like that. I agree with this. Yeah. And yeah.
I think we're coming up to a natural conclusion. I would like to thank you very much, Thomas, and you very much, Mikkel, for coming. But in particular, and especially in light of humans being, like you say, beings who really want to be recognized, I think we should give a huge recognition to Thomas Hylland Eriksen for coming today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Just stay. I hope this makes your day in a fast and furious world. Academics can do some good. The academics here at Aarhus University have produced a little series of books called Tænkepauser.
All right.
So this is a little gift that gives you the opportunity to slow down.
Yeah, I mean there are a few things that can only be done slowly. Okay, drinking red wine, smoking a pipe, and reading.
Oh. Perhaps on that note, I have a little bit of red wine for you, Mikkel. Here you go. Thank you for coming.
I can drink this fast. There's no problem.
And there is actually an opportunity for all of us and you to slow down, because there is wine, I think, down on the tables here. I just want to thank you all for coming tonight, and keep an eye out for the website Futures lecture series. We have Bruno Latour coming in the spring, so everything will be even faster and even furiouser. Thank you. Thank you very much.